Hello, welcome to 1 Hour SaaS. I am Mubashir Iqbal, everybody calls me Mubs, and I am building a SaaS business in just 1 hour a day. We're building Podcast Ping, which is an uptime monitoring system for podcasters. So this is the update for hour number 16. And today I started thinking about how we were going to structure the code for actually running all of the checks. That once people sign up and they add a podcast and they choose what things they want to monitor, how we actually going to watch those things and see if they're available and all that kind of stuff. So I started off just spending a few minutes kind of reviewing. There's a package called Laravel Uptime Monitor by a company called Spathy, and I'll put the link to this in the show notes. This package has been out for a few years, and it does do some of the things that we want to do in terms of being able to kind of monitor if a website is responding or not, so those kind of things. It's not a hosted application or anything like that, but I was just kind of curious to see how they structured their packages and things like their classes and things, and so I just kind of scanned that over to see how they set things up to see if I could learn anything. And it's really well written and everything. So if you haven't checked it out, I would highly recommend it. And then so once I got through that, I started thinking about, okay, we're gonna make use of Laravel's task scheduling, where we'll actually run some of the checks from. But then we're actually gonna also make use of Laravel queues, where we can create jobs and kind of. So each check is going to create a job, and the job is going to get onto a queue, and then the queue will execute the job. So we can do a lot of things asynchronously and all at the same time, and so all that kind of stuff. We might run into problems in the future about jobs that are taking too long and they're living on the queue for too long. But there's a lot of stuff in Laravel to manage all of that queue stuff. Just to make sure things aren't taking too long and kind of everything like that. So let's take a quick look at the code just to see kind of what I did. So there's a task here that will get scheduled to kind of run every 60 seconds or so, maybe even more often than that. And then we kind of loop over all of the check types that we have in the system. For each, we load all of the podcasts that are not archived. Actually, let me step back for a second. I wanted to build a system that would be kind of flexible, so that as we added more checks, it would be something that could be updated without having to touch lots of different files and things like that. So what I decided to do was try and build something that would use the check types table that we have, which has listed all the checks in it, and for each of the podcasts that we're supposed to run checks for, it could automatically, based on that table, figure out what the class is for the particular job that we want in the queue, and just kind of load that kind of automatically and then kind of execute that job. And so all that you would have to do in theory is to create the job for that particular kind of check, add that particular check type to the checks table, to the check types table, and then as soon as somebody enabled one of those checks, it would just start to kind of work. So without us having to go back into this kind of file and say switching on what kind of checks, what things were enabled and sort of things like that. So kind of put together this kind of system so we just load all of the types here, and then we load all the podcasts. Well, I just load 100 right now. We'll figure out a way to paginate through that, or just batch things in some other kind of way. And then for each podcast, and where the team's also still active, they're still a paying customer for Podcast Ping. We then kind of loop over each of the types, and then we kind of dynamically build a name of the class for the job for this particular check that we're going to do. And then if this particular podcast has that particular check enabled, we can then kind of see if that class exists just to be 100% sure. And then we can kind of dispatch that particular job for that particular podcast into our queuing system, and then the queuing system will just take it off and then kind of execute it as it has availability. And then that's it, right? Like that job will then kind of take over. It will then figure out if it needs to send a notification or not and do all that kind of stuff. But so we've kind of built a system now that will allow us to scale, I think. As we add new check types and things should just automatically end up on the queues as soon as those things are enabled. So I haven't actually. So right now I've got to the point where it will loop over all the podcasts for it and check if which of the checks are enabled for that particular class, and then queue that particular job. And so I created the sort of jobs here, but they don't actually do anything yet. So like this is just that one. So we pass in the podcast so we know which thing is being, which podcast is being checked. And then we'll have to, in the handle method, we'll have to do whatever we need to do to actually check if that particular check will pass or not. And then so we can add things into the logs tables and change the status if it fails, or sort of all of that kind of stuff as well. So that's going to be in the next hour. But that's it for today. We've got so that was our 16, and so we've got halfway through that, and then tomorrow we should have a functioning check, and probably over the weekend we'll have to think about how do we send emails and things like that out to people to let them know that things aren't working, or if they are working. So hopefully by this weekend, which I think was my goal, was to have a kind of functioning MVP. It's functioning. It's definitely not the finished MVP. We still have a lot to do in terms of the user interface and stuff, but function first, and then we can figure the rest of that out too. But that's it for today. And hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.